This month, the month of June, is traditionally the month of the Sacred Heart, because during it we'll be celebrating a feast in honor of this great sign of God's love. Through Jesus, God loved us with a heart that is human and divine. But devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus is more than something we do only for a month. It's more than a feast day or certain prayers or litanies. To honor or to be devoted to the Sacred Heart of Jesus means dedicating ourselves to having a heart like His. It means sharing the deepest concerns and feelings of the heart of Jesus. What does Jesus feel as He looks out on the world today? How His heart must be moved with compassion, as it was when He walked this earth and saw the masses of poor and sick people, crowds who seemed lost like sheep without a shepherd. As we strive to have hearts like Jesus' own heart, we can't help being moved by Pope Benedict's general intention for this month, in which he addresses the root cause of much of the world's poverty. That cause? Crushing debt that inhibits many nations from moving out of poverty into a development that meets the physical and educational needs of their citizens. Specifically, Pope Benedict asks us to pray that international efforts to help poorer nations may bring prompt, concrete results to relieve the crushing burden of foreign debt. Given the state of the economy in our own nation and the difficulties many families and corporations face because of their own debts, we can easily understand the suffering that accompanies debt. It can be said that the indebtedness of poor nations to wealthy nations is a new form of slavery. Some nations have already paid back what they were loaned, but are unable to be free from debt because they're stuck paying the interest they still owe. For example, from 1970 to 2002, African nations received about $540 billion in loans, and during that same period of time, they paid back $550 billion in the principal and interest on those loans. Yet, African nations still owe $295 billion. So, more aid is required to help these nations, and a vicious circle is created. You could say that pouring more aid into impoverished nations without canceling their debts is like trying to fill a bathtub with the drain open. It's estimated that for every $1 in aid, these nations pay back $2.30 in debt service. And so, the poverty continues and gets worse. Now, why are the Pope and the Church concerned with this? Isn't this for the governments to deal with and solve? Why is the Church involved? Because, as Pope Benedict said in his message for this year's World Day of Peace, quote, "This is a problem which the conscience of humanity cannot ignore, since the conditions in which a great number of people are living are an insult to their innate dignity, and as a result are a threat to the authentic and harmonious progress of the world community." End quote. In other words, unless the situation of crushing foreign debt is addressed, the threat of conflict, violence, and war will grow. Prior to the Jubilee year 2000, Pope John Paul II called for a release from debt. He referred to the Judeo-Christian practice of a jubilee that was celebrated every 50th year, and in which slaves were freed and land that had been sold was given back to its original owner. Here's what he had to say, quote, "The existence of foreign debt, which is suffocating quite a few countries, represents a complex problem. The Church, in her pastoral concern, cannot ignore this difficult situation, since it touches the lives of so many people. I, too, have frequently expressed my concern about this situation, which in some cases has become unbearable. In light of the imminent Great Jubilee year 2000, and recalling the social significance that jubilees had in the Old Testament, I wrote, in the spirit of the book of Leviticus chapter 25, verses 8 to 12, Christians will have to raise their voice on behalf of all the poor of the world, proposing the Jubilee as an appropriate time to give thought, among other things, to reducing substantially, if not canceling outright, the international debt which seriously threatens the future of many nations." End quote. The fact that the problem is, as Pope John Paul put it, complex, should lead us to pray more than ever for a solution to this problem. We cannot, like the rich man in the Gospel of Luke chapter 16, turn away from the poor nations because we are not economists and because this problem is too complex to understand, much less solve. Jesus said that what's impossible for human beings is not impossible for God. But our hearts must be moved, as Jesus' heart was and most certainly is, so that we do not ignore the cause of so much poverty in our world. Thus, we commit ourselves to praying with Pope Benedict that the nations of our world will work together to bring prompt and concrete help to relieving the crushing burden of foreign debt.